Hi there, and welcome. My name is Moshe Karen, and I am a civil engineer. Today we'll be going over, in this tutorial, how to create and grade a detention pond in Civil3D. So, to begin, let's go over a little bit about grading and its capabilities. In this sample file that I have on screen, I have to the north of my property a created north pond. Looking in my tool space on the left, I can see that if I expand out my project site, I have a northern pond. If I expand my surfaces, I have a north pond surface, which we'll get more into during this tutorial. But to show a brief overview, we have a feature line, which we use as the basis for creating this northern detention pond as shown. Some of the nice features about creating a detention pond using the grading tools in Civil3D are that we are able to use a lot of dynamic functionality. For example, if I select the feature line as shown, right click, do move command, and take a random point, I can shift it to a new location, and just like that, my surface will regenerate. Very powerful. Let's undo. Let's show another example. If I select, say, a grading element, and I open the grading editor on screen, I should get a grading tool. So let's do it the second way. Another way to open up this palette is by going to the Home ribbon, Home tab, going to the Create Design ribbon, expanding grading, and doing grading tool creation. From there we can get again to the grading editor. On screen on top it selects a point in the grading site. I click, and then I have in my panorama tools that let me see how it was made. So for example, in this circumstance, my criteria which was used was grading to elevation bottom, and if I choose to at a later point change it, I can, and once again my model automatically updates. Very powerful tools. So let's discuss these a little bit more in detail now that you've seen some of the powerful dynamic functionality of it. Let's hide that for now. Check and close. So in this case, I have as an XREF background, if I reload it, you can see here is my project site. I have made the detention pond to the north, and now I want to create the same thing for the detention pond to the south. So let's see what we need to do. The first step is to copy the line work that was used for the detention pond. In this case, I have it already selected. Next, I will go to the Home tab, again go to the Create Design section, click on Feature Line, and in order to create a feature line, I can do Create Feature Line from Object. With this tool, a dialog then pops up, which helps me set up how I want my feature line to interact. As a quick overview, feature lines are sort of a three-dimensional polyline, for simplicity's sake, with much more functionality. So in this circumstance, I want to create a new type of site. In this case, I will call it South Pond, and I click OK. Next, I'll rename my feature line as Top Elevation, and for now, I'll just say the top elevation is 84.0 feet. Next, it asks me to select the style. I will go with that default. And I want to maintain the layer that this polyline was previously drawn at, the Berm layer, as shown at the top. So I will select Use Selected Entity. And a shortcut here is sometimes you may want to jump straight into the elevation editor. So in this case, I'm going to click this dialog to do Assign Elevations. I'll click OK. The command that pops up is assign elevations. Since I checked the dialog before, I want my elevation of this entire feature line to be at 84 feet. So click OK. Now, if I select that feature line, select the feature line, look at its properties to the right, you can see that the elevation is consistent across the board at 84 feet. Perfect. So now we have our feature line from which we start. And in addition to that, we created a south pond grading. But in addition to creating a grading site, we will need to create a grading group. So let's jump in and see how that is done. Going back to the top, we will use the most common tool for grading, which is called the grading creation tool. Through it, typically, we will work following a procedure from the left to the right as we move our way along through creating our grading pond. The first thing we need to do is select the grading group. If I hover over and do the drop down, I can now select my south pond. But as I just mentioned, we need to create a grading group. So in this case, I will click create new grading group. I will call it south pond. And since I will want to create an automatic surface, I will click this dialog. These are just style options and tessellation. In this circumstance, I'm not doing a volume calc, so I'll leave this off for now. I'll then click OK. I'll ask for more details about the surface that I have just created. I will again keep the defaults, click OK. And now I have my grading group. This will be useful because whatever grading objects I create will now be stored under this subcategory. Next, if I do select surface, this is for when I'm doing a calculation, a soil or a cut and fill calculation. I can ignore that for now. Last is the setting of the grading layers tool. I'll leave it as the default. And let's now discuss some of the features of a grading tool. When we look at the drop-down, we have many different options for criteria of how we want to grade. A useful tip is selecting this down arrow enables us to see the parameters of each of the design of the grading tools. So if I wanted per se to create a flat bed that is a distance of 8 feet, I could start with an 8 feet distance berm. In looking at more detail of its criteria, we can see that it targets a distance. The distance in this case is 8, but it's unlocked, so we can change it. It goes along a projection slope. Format is in grade style, which is locked, but the grade is 0 because we want it to be perfectly flat and horizontal. Next is the style and the like. These, as we will discuss, there's other options. There's different ones which we'll be using, such as grade to specific elevation, grade to the bottom of the pond, but all these come from my settings. That if we look down in our tool space settings tab, and we go down to grading, and we go to grading criteria set, over here we have a custom made grading set. And if we open it up, we can see those same selection of different criteria. So if at any point we wanted to make a new criteria or change the defaults of these parameters, we could do that from my settings. So let's show a little bit more what this does. If we select distance berm, we can then choose the create grading tool. If we look at the command ribbon, it's asking us to select a feature line. If we hover over, we can select the feature line as shown. Next, it asks for which side we want to grade to. So I'll select the outer one. And do we want it to apply to the entire length? Well, actually, if we look at the X reference in our background of how the architect wanted the site to be laid out, we can see that he only wanted a berm to extend to this point. So I'm actually going to click no. Press spacebar. And the first prompt is it asks for a starting point. With my AutoCAD snaps on, I can select this endpoint. It automatically assigns the station. Press spacebar or enter. Then these arrows show how much of the surrounding feature line is going to be included. So if I work my way around to the other side, and I once again snap to this endpoint, it selects the new station. I press spacebar, press the distance. So the default distance was 8, but if we look at how it was drawn up in our background file, we can see that we want 5. So I will type in the top 5, press enter. Now it asks for the grade. I want to leave it as 0. And just like that, we can see that it has created a grading object. The way you can tell is a diamond will appear on screen and the objects will all act as one. What the software is doing is it's creating a new feature line that's offset from the first one and grading in between the two. Again, very powerful. Now if we escape and we want to do another step, let's now try. So now we've created our berm, a flat edge. Let's try to grade down to the center of this detention pond. So again, just for reference, I'll open up the arrows and look at my drop-down menu, and I'll choose relative elevation, bottom of pond. The criteria that it has set for this circumstance is, in this case, we're targeting an elevation that's relative to the previous one. So our feature line was set at 84 feet, and it's targeting a relative elevation that is 5 feet less than that. But it'll prompt us since we have the lock unchecked. Next, it asks for a slope, and that slope is set as a default of 4 to 1. But again, it will prompt us for what we prefer. So let's click again the Create Grading tool, select the feature line, select it, select the side, the inside, apply the entire length. Actually, this time the answer is going to be yes, because I'm not concerned of this opening anymore. Press Y. Now it asks what my elevation should be. I'm going to keep the default for now and press space. Slope, I'm going to keep the default. And look at that. We now have a grading that goes to a 5-foot depth relative to our feature line. Now it's always good practice to see how your model is coming along. So if I escape and I select the grading group, click select, I select the surface that was created by it actually, do select, and I jump to object viewer, we can see that our model is coming along quite nicely. But if you'll notice, it's a donut at this point. Something's off. And in this case, it does not yet have a base filled in. We can remedy that. But if we look at everything else looks nice. It is maintaining a 4 to 1 slope, gradual, slow, a flat berm along the side, and we'll be adding more. But how do we fill in this missing component? Well, for that, we'll need to go back to our home ribbon, design, and do create grading infill. Similar to the diamond shape that we find by grading objects and is shown on screen here and here, we need to make sure that this flat surface has one as well. So on a command bar, it's asking to select an area to infill. I just select inside, and just like that, it fills in what the surface should look like in that place. And if we jump again to, and let's escape, select it, take again a look at our object viewer, and we can see this time that it has now completed our detention pond. But there's one final step that we want. As is the circumstances in many design problems, we'll want to have a targeted surface, either the existing surface that we'll want to target for our excavation, or possibly a future stage of the project for proposed or temporary construction. So for that, we can do the dropdown and we can do grade to a surface. Well, in this case, I've set up various different slopes, but I'll do a steep slope for now, a 2 to 1. Again, we'll click on a target surface. Target surface needs to be selected. So the software catches me. It asks for which surface I want to target. In this case, I want to target the existing grade. So I'll select it from the drop-down, click OK. And you can see that the software is telling me, again, which group I'm assigning it to and which surface I'm targeting for this command. Because this criteria is targeting a surface, unlike a relative elevation. And it's performing a cut fill with a 2 to 1 slope and a 2 to 1 fill. So now let's select the grading surface. Let's create a new one. Let's select the feature. In this case, I can actually select the outer feature line of the of the 5-foot berm as my starting point. If I select OK and I do apply to the entire length, watch what happens as I accept the defaults on the top. And just like that, it automatically figures out, the software calculates how to maintain that 2 to 1 slope in order to reach the existing elevations of grade. So now, let's take a peek at how it looks. One more time. Let's escape a couple times, press select, go to our object viewer, and we can see how nice the software has created a target slope for the outside boundary of our detention pond. We have a nice 5-foot berm and a 4 to 1 slope. But let's show really just how powerful Civil3D is with the tool of our grading editor. If we go to the grading editor, it asks to select a point on the grading site. As I hover each one, it shows the various different types of grading that was used. In this case, we have 3 that were used while creating our south pond. So let's say that the design comes back. Instead of wanting a 4 to 1, the design team wants a 2 to 1. So I can use this grading editor tool, change it 2 to 1, press OK, and watch as the software recreates that surface at a much steeper slope. But let's say it changes again. Let's say it's a 6 to 1. Once again, I can recreate it. Let's say I wanted to change that elevation to be 8 feet instead, or 6 feet. I'll go even deeper. So we can change these parameters at really any point, and it will update our grading group. And you can do this for any of the tools. Let's say we do this outer one. But remember how previously it was 5? Let's say it was 8. It automatically adjusts the outer target grading to the surface along with the change in the berm distance. And as one more cool feature, we can also select the feature line. And remember how before we were able to take the location and drag it to a new location on screen? We can also modify points in any of the grips shown on our feature line. So let's say I drag out the feature line and readjust it. The software then recalculates all the different portions to give me a new surface. Let's undo. Let's try it again. Select this grip, turn off my snaps. Let's drag it out like a foot or so. And just like that, the software redraws our grading groups. As the last step in any good practice of grading, we'll want to incorporate this new section of grading that we've added to our surface. So in this circumstance, the designer team have already started creating a corridor for the roadway and grading groups for the sidewalks. But we want to also add to our final finished surface this south pond, similar to how we had our north pond. If we take a look at this combined proposed surface, we can see that it is comprised, if we look at the edit definitions, we can see that it has 3 surfaces that I pasted into it, thereby making it a composite surface of all the different surfaces. And the order is very important for when pasting surfaces. Let's say if we go to surface properties and we go to our definition, if one of these was pasted before the other or after the other, then it would paste on top and cause a change to the existing surface. One would override. The most recent surface to be pasted is the one that will govern. So let's take a look at how it looks right now. If I do select surface, if I go to object viewer, we can see that the surface currently contains the northern pond, but does not yet contain our south pond. So if we go to our definitions, we go to edit, we right click, and we do paste surface, we can select from our surface list our south pond that we generated before. We click OK. Now we can see that the south pond has been added. Now any changes that we do in our sites to our feature line and so on will be carried up the list to the final proposed. So a good workflow would possibly be to have one engineer working on the detention ponds, data shortcut it, and allow another user to then paste it into their surface, thereby creating smaller file sizes. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned a trick or two, and that's all for today.